Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world. With self-care strategies from Chinese medicine, functional medicine, Ayurveda, neuroscience, and beyond. I'm your host, Brodie Welch, a licensed acupuncturist and transformation catalyst, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. Welcome to today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today's conversation is going to be about moving through trauma and how we do that in accordance with the principles of Chinese medicine. My guest today is a friend and colleague who's been on the show before, Ellen Goldsmith, who has had an extraordinarily tough couple of years. As she shares in our conversation, she lost her husband to cancer and then actually just unexpectedly lost her mom within the past week. So this is going to be way beyond the theoretical and much more personal, as we're all moving through collective trauma together as the world emerges slowly from the COVID era. This episode contains some really practical tips for moving through grief and for being soft with ourselves, in addition to tips for how to align yourself with the season of spring. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Hello and welcome to A Healthy Curiosity. I'm your host, Brodie Welch, and today we're going to be talking about trauma, moving through trauma, which is something that we are all doing right now, if you're listening in real time, coming out of the COVID pandemic era and starting to emerge. And this is obviously something that's going to look a little different for everyone, but certainly the experience of having our lives disrupted dramatically is something that we can all relate to. And I'm going to be speaking with a colleague of mine who has had quite a year, who's had personal trauma in addition to this COVID trauma, who has been on the show in the past and I'm grateful to her graciousness and ability to join me for this conversation today. Ellen Goldsmith is a licensed and board-certified acupuncturist and Chinese herbalist with over 2 decades of experience helping people solve their complex health challenges. Her integrative, body-centered, and intuitive approach is grounded in years of study and experience in helping people from all walks of life. She's the author of Nutritional Healing with Chinese Medicine and 175 recipes for optimal health. She teaches and speaks frequently to professionals and to the public, as well as consulting for companies and organizations. And she is based in Portland, Oregon. Ellen, welcome back to A Healthy Curiosity.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be with you again, Brodie. Thanks for having me.
I'm especially grateful that you are coming to us today from a closet across the country from where you live, following the passing of your mom. And so I just want to honor the fact that there's been a trauma that's hit home for you really recently. And as we were just chatting about just before we pressed record on this conversation, that it's really all kind of perfect timing, because that's what we're going to be discussing today is Chinese medicine and how Chinese medicine can be so useful to us during difficult periods of our lives. So I'd love to just start with, what do you think is something important about our medicine that you love for people to know in order to work through a difficult time?
Well, there are a few things that really come to me right away, and those are the things that brought me to the medicine in the first place. And the first, that life is all change, and that it's a circle. We come from nothingness, we come from conception, we go through life, and then we go back to from where we came. Wu Qi, it's called. We live in Tai Chi, the great Qi. So that's the first thing about the medicine, is that life is change. And the second thing that I think is key, and that has always been a very strong grounding force for me, is that we are intimately connected to the world we live in. And a lot of us, the world we live in is our family, our relationships, the work we do, etc. But really, we live in the universe. we live in nature, even if we're not living out in the wild, we're constantly, the cycles of light and warmth and growth and letting go and death and rebirth, that these are all the cycles that affect who we are and how we live and how we relate to the cycles of our own change and life. So that's the second thing. And the third thing was something one of my early teachers, Jeffrey Ewan, said. I remember from the stage of the cafeteria, the auditorium in a Chinatown elementary school where he taught years ago, was he said that health is really about living within our own boundaries. And that when we go over the boundary of the river, let's say, you get flooding. And that flooding, will just soak the earth. It will sweep things away. And when we live outside our own boundaries, we're more prone to becoming ill or not feeling well. So, and that's something that myself as a woman, as a health provider, healing person, have had to work on a lot. What are my healthy boundaries where I can work with my own energy so that I have resource to continually give?
Oh, I love that. I didn't know that you were a Jeffrey person also.
Yeah.
Did
Yes.
Yeah, or if I'd known, I had forgotten. Those are really so 3 really important points there, right? The
Mhm.
only constant is change, right? The
Mhm.
law of change is just so fundamental to Chinese medicine, and the fact that not only is the only constant change, but this change has a pattern, and that pattern is revealed in nature. And the
Mhm.
fact that even if we are removed from nature, we can also still reconnect with it and observe it and see what the patterns have to teach us as we move through the cycles of the seasons and the cycles of day and night, and really that essentially is hooking us up with yin and yang. And that third part about boundaries, yeah, so important, especially for those of us who are givers, right? Who tend to want to
Mhm.
serve others, and that feels so natural and authentic, and yet we're humans, we have limits. And
That's so right. That's so right. I just wanted to say one other thing about a relationship of change in the seasons, that the beauty of seasonal change is that we get to recreate ourselves. We have those different kinds of energies in every season. In spring, that sense of regrowth and rebirth and clearing things out and wanting to start fresh and anew, and just clean the windows so we really can see, as opposed to that energy of autumn when things start to descend and we start to go in and start to kind of organize ourselves for the coming year. I mean, it's the old academic calendar for me, but that sense of just organizing, coming back from that abundant kind of exuberant summer. So we get to connect with that energy with the change of every season. And I think what we saw from this past year, which has been a blur for most people, is that when spring was about to emerge last March, we could not emerge with that season. We were locked down.
right, we were locked down.
And
Exactly.
and I'm in New York City right now, and of course New York just went through this extraordinary trauma last March, with so much death and so much fear and all of that. So our cyclical year has been so severely interrupted. And in a sense, that was a traumatic event, and that kind of has continued. So I kind of have moved off the first question you asked, but you can see. I mean, I hope that people listening are going, yeah, I do have that connection, every seasonal thing, every seasonal change. And yes, this year has been a complete disruption to that.
And not only did we not get to move out into spring last year, so many people have just been describing their lives as like Groundhog Day, right? That just
Hmm.
that every day
Right,
is the same, and
right.
there really is like there's so much sameness and monotony, and nobody ever leaves the house, and like it's that there's a sense of kind of futility, and in the sense that we're treading water and not necessarily moving through anything, which
Yeah.
so I feel like there is that desire for there to be something that punctuates the and comes through the monotony. And really, I think that one of the things about spring is like new growth, new energy going in new directions, and that at the same time, for those of us who who maybe a lot on our plates already, or who have lots of ideas, or who have drive and ambition, if that hasn't been killed by COVID, that there's a certain amount of like, in order to not overextend, there necessarily needs to be a paring back, or like a discernment, deciding what we are going to cultivate, what new growth we're going to foster, because we don't have infinite energy or time. And so therefore, kind of like what the shape of our lives takes on, where we put this vital energy, that kind of that when we get the vision of what we want, what do we want to do with that energy that we have, that's a function of the liver, and then our ability to actually to have the courage to pull the trigger on that, to have to move forward, to bring it into action. It's that function of the gallbladder, right? That audacity to move forward in a way that feels true for us. And that's very much what's going on now in this season. But I feel like step one that I often forget is the like recognizing that we do need to kill off the other choices. We can't keep doing everything.
R Right, if I may just kind of jump back to that
Sure.
period you were talking about where, it was Groundhog Day, and we couldn't discern, and we didn't know what to do, we didn't know what to our focus was off, you know, uh, 15 months ago, I lost my husband after 2 years of brain cancer, and his demise really took place in the last 6 months of his life. And so after he died in January, I had been grieving a little bit, every step of the way as he lost function. And so when we moved into COVID, I remember about after 3 weeks in lockdown or something in Portland, my friends were going, "Oh my God, I just want to like get on with it here." And like, oh, I'm so confined. And I thought, wow, I've been like living like this for the last year and a half. And really, what I felt, what you were describing there, was grief and grieving, which of course is the energy of lung and large intestine and letting go. And as we were thrown into that period where we couldn't move, we had to let go. We had to let go of our expectations of wanting it to be different, of wanting to move forward, and so how metal chops wood, right?
Yeah.
In the five elements, so that if we couldn't embrace that grieving, which was really hard to do because we all were also in a period of shock, which affects our hearts and our heart chi, we were stuck. And so we were thrown up against ourself. And of course, I always know that grief compounds grief. So the grief, whatever, and there were so many different levels of grief in that initial period, grief of loss of routine, of work, of finances, of health, of, all of those things. And it's almost like until we embrace the fact that we're grieving the loss of a strange normalcy that we're not really sure we want back, it's going to be really hard to move into that emerging, of spring, that kind of that energy that discerns and cuts through, like, makes those choices that the gallbladder helps us make, and the liver helps spread that our chi and our energy out. So we might notice that some of us, our reach has changed. I don't want to kind of qualify it as a this or that, but it's changed. And
Yes.
so what has that change brought us? In a way, COVID also gave us people an incredible opportunity, if we were able to support ourselves financially, to reflect. So, I think in a way this is perfect kind of conversation, because we can't really move forward until we really look back and also acknowledge that grieving is not really like sitting in the room crying. My grief with my husband was a lot of looking out the window, just kind of going, oh, what now? It's like, what's next? I don't know. It's like living with not knowing. Yeah.
So there was a more reflective quality to your grief, and sort of a disruption, that, well, I think of the loss of a partner, right? That's
Mhm.
someone that you've really defined your life with, and you
Right.
that and that touches really every aspect of your world. I know that
Mhm.
you two, especially
Yes.
being colleagues as well as partners, that there's an identity evolution that takes place because you're no longer married to that person. You're no longer with that person
Right.
after they've transitioned. So there's not only the loss of their presence in your daily physical experience, but really kind of that, what does that mean for you? Who are you without this relationship?
Exactly, and I think, I mean, I was lucky. I got to be with my husband, for those 2 years. I got to move through them, through so many different stages with him. And I just think of, those 300, 400,000 people who could not do that, whose loved ones were taken from them quickly, who did not have the opportunity to let go piece by piece. You know, that's a whole different kind of thing and a whole kind of different trauma that disrupts the flow of our chi and blood, hurts our heart, our heart's chi and yin and yang, and drains our kidney, our kidney chi, all of these things that, until we allow or have a space to do that grief or grieving, whatever form that may take, it's really hard to kind of rebuild. Because grief is, of course, the lungs. Crying is, of course, the expression. Sobbing is the expression of loss and sadness. And that is the most exhausting emotion, natural emotion that we
Oh,
experience.
yeah. And that motion, even if we're not crying, just that anyone listening, if you can tune into the experience bodily of grief, there's a directionality to it, right? That grief
Yes.
moves downward and inward, and it makes you slump over and your chest collapse. And which is why I think that it's said that the root, or that the seat of grief is the lungs, and that's
Hmm.
the organ that it will affect. And that is, like, who wants to feel that for very long, right?
Yeah,
I don't blame anyone who wants to bounce away from grief, because, like, that's a
absolutely.
crappy feeling, right? That's a really hard thing to be
Oh,
with,
yeah. Yeah.
and I'm wondering, just because you are so knowledgeable in this medicine and so fresh off of a big deal trauma, losing your husband, that what advice would you have for people who are having difficulty being with what is?
That's such an extraordinarily wonderful question because I want to acknowledge that it's really hard to be with what is sometimes. And it's hard to navigate it alone because the bodily feeling of it can be so unbearable for some people. And I just always encourage people to get help, get therapeutic help, just opening up, speaking about things physiologically actually has a beneficial impact on our immune system, on our nervous system. Talking with people, or if you don't like to talk, if you're an introverted type of person, writing, making art, music, listening to music, something that opens you up, something. Maybe it's a place that you go, maybe it's a piece of music you listen to, anything that helps you to open up so that the feeling can come out. Because grief that isn't processed turns to depression, could turn to anger, can turn to all kinds of resentments, all kinds of things. So, it's natural, and the grieving process has no timeline because you go through different periods. If you've lost someone like as a shock, that's a whole different thing, and that can take longer. So, I just encourage, it's very hard to navigate it alone. There's a beautiful man named David Kessler with a K, who worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, one of the great teachers on death and dying in this country and in the world. And he does a lot around grief that I find very good, very helpful, very real. So there are books, there are things like that, because it's just hard to do it alone. And, you know,
Absolutely. I think that there is so much, and really, like, that we are social creatures, and that
Mhm.
connecting heart to heart with another human being who is going to listen empathetically or just be with you is such an important therapeutic intervention. The other things you mentioned, I feel like I'm observing that the things you said were speaking about it, with a counselor, or writing about it, or movement, or art. These are movements out, right? And that's what an emotion
Yeah.
fundamentally is it's a movement of energy. And so you're describing ways that we can actually get that energy to move out of ourselves and not to stagnate.
And also for us to feel, sometimes when we lose someone, people, there's another expression of grief, which is shutting down because it's too much.
Yeah.
And so, part of like listening to your favorite piece of music opens your heart. And so our hearts
Yeah.
break open, but that's because we're alive and we feel deeply and we love. What is that
Yes.
Shakespearean? It's better to have loved and lost than not to have loved at all. I truly I can embrace that now. And so, but also, what we do, Brodie, in terms of acupuncture, qigong, breathing, yoga, anything that helps to support the parasympathetic nervous system. That's that rest and restoration, rejuvenation part of our nervous system to take us out of that sympathetic, that fight and flight, that stress part of our nervous system is going to also help us to heal because it's very hard to let go when we're all wound up.
Yeah,
and
exactly. It's like the opposite of letting go, right? When we
it's
when we get
exactly
stressed, we tighten up and we retain, right? That everything contracts.
right. And it's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to let people know, but I see it more and more. I think one of the gifts of COVID is that people are more vulnerable now. We are speaking more about things that we kind of kept behind closed doors before, whether it be our grief or our loss or our pain or such, and I think this is good. We need to share humanity with each other. And that's the beauty of Chinese medicine too, that when we're truly in balance, it's not like, oh, we're so chilled out and we're so like happy and cool. No, it means that we can ride the waves of life, whether they be calm and peaceful or whether we learn how to ride that big wave that's crashing into shore. Chinese medicine can support that kind of return to our true nature. It may not restore it may not completely get restored, but it helps to restore our innate energy, our innate capacity to evolve and change and to heal.
To quote from one of the first articles I ever shared with the Huffington Post, Qigong is like yoga's less popular, less sexy cousin. It's a body-mind exercise or moving meditation that you deepen into with every flowing movement. I created a class rooted in one of the oldest traditional Qigong forms that you can do in 20 minutes a day, anywhere, anytime, with no stretchy pants required. I call it 12 Treasures Qigong, and it's like a moving multivitamin for every system of your body. You get a downloadable video so you can practice with me in my backyard, or you can listen to the audio track along with a cheat sheet of PDFs to help you really get into your body. To thank you for being an amazing podcast listener, use the code FRIENDOFTHEPOD for 20% off at checkout. A lifelong practice for less than what you'd spend on just one acupuncture treatment or massage. Head to the classes and meditations page at brodiewelch.com today and use Friend of the Pod for a discount at checkout. What you said about the heart has to integrate the life experience, right? That it's like the
Hmm.
conductor of the orchestra. And so it has to be, it has to be informed by the functions of all the other organs and bring them together in a coherent way. And so when we are shut down or in shock, or when we're not when we're not entertaining what's real, when we're not spending time being with what is and allowing it to move through us, then it's really hard to have authentic enthusiasm. It's hard to be in the present moment because the heart doesn't have all the information. The heart is cut off from the function, in this case of the lungs. If it's it and it's not able to integrate that into the full functionality of our being. And so it's really for us to then feel either anxious or depressed, or for that to start manifesting it like there's something off, or there's something that I feel like I need to constantly be in control of, because what if what if this thing that I'm keeping at bay comes up? That it's a much more stressful way to live, and just that there is like it can be so not fun, but the
Right.
rewards are large if we are willing to go there.
Yes, and our an what if we could experience our anxiety and start to engage with it or listen to it and let it be a teacher? Like, I know when I feel anxious, I'm either feeling anxious because there's something I don't know that I'm very concerned about, or, there's some kind of big thing that's coming up for me. I'm talking about this personally, everybody's different. And some people have more high level anxiety, that's all the time, you know. And when we feel depressed, I mean, they can kind of, we can start to have a conversation with it. And what is it trying to tell us? Sometimes when I have an anxious feeling, it means, oh, no, 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 no. I can't deal with that. Well, a good example is, it's been over a year since my husband passed away, and, times you have to let go of things, those things that belong to him. And so as I go through the house and I come up to his things, sometimes I go, aha, that's going to go to Sheriffle, my niece's boyfriend. And sometimes I look at it and I go, oh, that just makes me anxious. And I go, okay, I'm not going to deal with that now, because part of being able to work with our anxiety or work with the depression that may come up, and I'm not talking about serious, bipolar, or, you know, serious issue, clinical depression and anxiety, but maybe I'm talking about being able to listen to what it's trying to tell us. So when I come up to that in my husband's things, I go, I can't deal with that. And you have to acknowledge that the body needs to be able to gather and be strong enough to deal with something that may be very emotionally challenging. And that's another way our medicine can really support, helping to build, again, like I said, that innate vitality. Because as we become more resilient, and I love that word, there's a kind of flexibility to our nervous system that, Chinese medicine, acupuncture, qigong, yoga as an extended form, breathing exercises, all of these things promote eating well. The more resilient our nervous system is, the more we can handle things that might make us anxious, and we don't have to shut down because we can't deal with it. But we can also acknowledge, hey, I'm not ready to deal with this yet. And that's okay too.
Right, and because when we have that awareness that, "Okay, yeah, this feels like a lot today. This feels like that
Mm-hmm.
this is stressing me out. I can't go there right now."
Right.
That's kindness, right? That, like,
Yes.
recognizing that we are, that our energy isn't the same every day, and that what we're going through tending to our internal world might be actually more important than the decluttering of the stuff, and that
There you go.
it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, now in this kind of collective trauma that we're in, I mean, you and I are seeing it, and we're going to see it for years, the people we work with, that how do we support people to build their inner resiliency so that they can deal with this huge change, huge life world change that we're all in the middle of?
There there is so much of that going around, and
Yes.
and it's like, I think that one of the most important keys to being resilient is that the dead simple basic daily habits,
Right.
the just the getting enough sleep, the exercise, the nourishing food, the movement practices, and spending a little time being with ourselves. Like,
Hmm.
I don't think it has to be more complicated than simply tending to this foundational stuff in a regular way, because
Absolutely.
I mean, I didn't get enough sleep a couple nights ago, and wow, it was such a hard day.
Mhm.
Like things that just ordinarily would not have been a big deal were so much more of a big deal. And
Yeah.
and that was just like one night of crappy sleep.
Right.
And it's like, so okay, life is throwing us enough challenges, and and really thinking about like the things that we can control, like what time we put ourselves to bed, that, or just making sure that we can wind down. I'm not saying that sleep is something we can control, but we can certainly create the circumstances to enable a good night's sleep. And so things like that, which are like, yeah, that you might think, well, whatever, I'll just watch one more show on Netflix, or I'll just stay up late reading this book or whatever. And I have learned the hard way so many times that none of that is worth it, you know?
I know, and then think about, like perimenopause or new motherhood where you're
Oh yeah.
you're up for an hour a night. My perimenopausal, menopausal women, up from 3 to 5 a.m., 2 hours of loss of sleep a night, that's in 7 days, that's you've lost a day and a half of sleep, or
Yeah.
my, new moms, who are up breastfeeding. I mean, and we kind of go, oh, wow, that makes sense. Like, that's why I'm tired. But then you get into that kind of adrenal kidney chi, drain where you kind of can't, you've got so much adrenaline in your system. So it's hard to kind of calm down, even, that overtiredness that prevents sleep. I mean, so, the simplest thing we can do every day, and we don't even have to make time for it because we're alive, we breathe. So,
Yeah.
just taking that deep breath in and breathing out really, really slow, counting till 4 or 6, and just gently blowing out through your mouth like you're bending the flame on a candle will start to release a lot of adrenaline and lactic acid and CO2 buildup. And just doing that 3 times when you notice it, or before you get out of bed, or when you go to bed, is a way to kind of cleanse, let go, reset the body. And you don't even have to like close the door and go away and do it, but
Right.
it's
Oh, yeah, available to us all the time without
24/7.
yeah, without having to change clothes or do anything special. And I think this really also just, for me, emphasizes what an efficient practice qigong is.
Hmm.
As we're breathing, we're moving,
Hmm.
and so and we're getting we're getting oxygen to our and carbon dioxide to our cells. We're changing our posture. We're becoming less stagnant. We're tuning
Right.
into our inner experience and becoming aware of what's there.
Yeah.
And again, it can just be as simple, as simple as just that breathing the arms up and exhaling, bringing the arms down towards our low bellies
Right.
and grounding ourselves. That's something that can be so simple, but a nervous system reset that we can give ourselves at any moment.
Another one that's not as subtle as breathing is shaking that we do in the qigong form I do, which is just standing and like shaking your body. And like you could do freestyle shaking. You could just think of like shaking the joints, and or if you have a big physio ball at home, you can sit on the ball and bounce on the ball just to kind of release that build up tension that gets stuck into your joints and everything. Also helps to kind of just change some of the energy and move that stagnation out.
I love that you bring that up. I was literally just on PubMed today researching shaking qigong, and apparently, there are a few studies that apparently small studies. So, I'm not saying this is absolute fact, but that it can help with bone density. It can help with
Hmm.
heart rate variability. It can help with
Mm,
core muscle and skeletal muscle strength.
mm,
And, so as well as balance, and so and I'm sure there are other things too, but and also that it yeah, can literally it can change your mood pretty fast. I've been prescribing that as well as sighing until you yawn. I've been prescribing that one to people all year for the tension and stress, and
yeah.
we'll throw a link to my little Vimeo video in the show notes. And so these are a bunch of like kind of biohack ways that we can let go of some stress and let go of some tension. Getting back to the seasonal stuff, I'm
Hmm.
curious what else you can you can offer to folks right now in the present moment as we move
Sure.
into the season of spring, as things, which I guess maybe just to fill this out for people, that yeah, it's about new growth, and it's about this sort of the yang energy growing, the upward outward energy of expression as we move from yin to yang. It can also be about assertiveness and standing up for yourself, and so getting back to what you said about boundaries, it's like this can be a time to fiercely defend one's boundaries
Mm.
if they need defending, as well as that upward outward nature is itself yang. It doesn't have to be aggressive, but it definitely is determined. It is, and it's also flexible, right? Like a tree growing, it doesn't grow straight up like a pole. It bends in the wind. It's flexible and adaptable. And so this idea of how do we move into spring with flexibility and adaptability, but also with confidence.
Yeah, I love the word determined because the life force is very determined to exert itself, you know. And so we have to honor that feeling. Sometimes we get a little bit more restless, which is also the energy of spring can be. So movement is like number one, to really move the body any which way that makes you feel good. Walking, biking, dancing around in your house, doing yoga, qigong. No one's at a pool these days because of COVID, but anything and you don't have to do a big thing. It's just to move your body. House cleaning works.
Mhm.
But, to move into this energy, which we've had a long winter, if you look at COVID, where we've all had to kind of hold back or be still or be inward. So you got to realize, we got to come out slowly. And also spring's a season that is very changeable. That old jazz standard, spring can really hang you up. Or as my grandmother would say, don't be silly. When you go out, make sure you have a jacket on and make sure you button it up because we have to protect our wei qi, we have to protect our immunity, especially with COVID. And so we can't just, go, woohoo, it's spring and take all the clothes off and like go have, ice cream or, cold drinks. We still need to acknowledge that kind of changeable weather, but we've got to let go of that heaviness. We've got to like lighten our foods, not so heavy cooked, not so long cooked, more lightly, like fresh saute, lightly braised, steamed, boiled, lighter cooking, maybe some salads. I like to say like pressed salads, which is a light fermentation where you put a little salt and a little pressure on like cucumber or cabbage or any kind of food, or make like a quick pickle, that quick fermentation process that is breaking down already so that we can digest more easily, because raw food is really hard for a lot of people to digest because it takes a lot of stomach fire, stomach chi to break down food that isn't already broken down. So lighter cooking, activity, being outside as much as you can, but of course protect yourself.
One of the ways we traditionally think of protecting ourselves and protecting our wei qi in Chinese medicine is to just wear a scarf, right? That
Absolutely.
because this idea that the environmental energy of the season of spring is wind, right?
Right.
And wind is said to be, well, like if you think about like that catching a cold or a flu or a virus or whatever is going to be a wind cold or a wind heat or a wind
Right.
damp or a wind dry, and that wind is said to enter the body through the back of the head. And that, yeah, so
Absolutely.
this idea that like, yeah, that we just never hurts to just have a scarf.
Right. And another in terms of foods or herbs, the pungent flavor. And I'm not talking about, hot spicy sauce. I'm talking about like new chives, arugula, turnip greens, turnips, like pungent and sweet. Baby carrots, baby beets, baby turnips, which actually are quite sweet, the Japanese white ones. New greens, these kinds of things. Peas, which are sweet, sweet peas, snap peas. These are foods that help to disperse buildup in the body, and they can be either warming or cooling. Of course, pungent like ginger is warming, pungent like garlic is warming, but pungent like mint is cooling, pungent like lavender is more cooling, pungent like lemon balm is more cooling. Sorry. So these
Cilantro.
cilantro is more
Yeah.
warming,
Oh, was
parsley is more warming. Yeah, basil is
I think of cilantro as cooling. That's interesting.
yeah,
Huh.
dill is more
Yeah.
warming. Yeah, these or all those herbs, cooking herbs, rosemary, thyme, oregano, those are kind
Mhm.
of pungent or aromatic and warming. They help move the digestive fire, and they help the digestive organs. So that's really important as we're starting to change from that kind of long winter we've been in the house, where people have been eating maybe stuff they didn't want to be eating, but they just couldn't help themselves. So you got to take it
Yeah.
slow.
I
Don't
love
go.
I love that you're giving us really concrete ideas and from if I can translate a little bit of maybe some of the commonalities that you've said,
Hmm.
and so that in case people are like, how are we supposed to remember all this? That a lot of the things that are in season right now are, where you live
Yes.
are the things to be eating, but especially the things that are young shoots and sprouts and things like that that have that like young energy of spring,
Yes.
and that you're suggesting well things like the quick pickles or the like the lighter foods so just basically think like make yourself a stir fry or or something that has like a quick cooking time and put some green spices in it.
Yeah, that's a good way. And in my book, the way I have my recipes organized, they're all by season. So you can go through the spring season and you can like just cook by that season and go, because I have like nettles and asparagus risotto. Now that's really yummy. And that's like ultimate spring. Nettles are blood cleansing, they're nourishing, they're natural antihistamine. Asparagus kind of gets rid of that internal heat that's in the body. So, there are just a lot of recipes in there that have all these things that we're talking about in cooking methods that kind of make it easy to go to. But I think what you just said is right. You just look for what's in the season and you'll be a-okay.
And yeah, we don't have to overthink it, but I do think that there's for those people who want to get more technical about it, more what Chinese medicine says we should be doing, your book is such an excellent resource for that, and I highly recommend it. That there's and we'll certainly have a link to that in the show notes and make sure that people can access it. As we come towards the end of our time here, I am wondering if you can give us a sense of like, okay, so we're using food to help reconnect us with the energy of the season. We're moving our bodies, we're being outside, we are allowing ourselves the grace and the time and space to reckon with the past and to move through trauma with help from a counselor, from a Chinese medicine provider, from whoever it is that's supporting us. Anything else that you wanna suggest that people do for themselves right now?
Wow, it's a fantastic question. And that was a beautiful synopsis, Brodie. You know, the word that comes up is interact. And because we've been so starved socially, we've been starved, in so many ways, just from being in this kind of more isolated or more compressed. Some of us who have small children have had to, have been lucky enough, but have had to work from home. That's a whole other thing. So the interaction can happen at the smallest level. It could be like reorganizing your sock drawer. It's very mundane. But or like just weeding a small patch of a garden or planting one plant in a pot. Something that you interact with that gives you a sense of satisfaction. A sense that, wow, look what I did here. And that's why I say really small.
I love that so much because this in the season of the liver, right? The liver like the liver has desires. The liver has and unfulfilled desires thwart the liver chi. And
Yes.
what you're saying is like make a small impact. That
Yes.
that interact with something small and manageable that like just even feeling that like planting one plant or organizing the sock drawer, I feel satisfied by that. I feel
Right.
an internal sense of like, okay, I've seen my power to transform something.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think also in this very productivity oriented world that's on 24/7 where people don't get to like turn their phones off and My daughter, she's at university and it's all remote and blah, blah, blah. It's really important to just, yeah, to stay, give ourselves things that we can turn off,
Mhm.
that we can turn on. And yeah.
I love that. My answer as I was reflecting on it is forgive.
Uh-huh.
Because
Hi.
that's another
Yep.
thing in this, season. There's a lot of, well, obviously polarization in our country and a lot of anger and outrage, and those are also things that can get exacerbated in the springtime, and that and for me, it's a lot of self-judgment. I can be my own worst critic, and and really, like, that if anybody with a perfectionistic tendency, that this is an opportunity to forgive ourselves for our perceived mistakes, as well as to recognize that we're human beings doing what we can, and that our best changes from day to day, and to really kind of soften a little bit and to allow for our growth. Because if we're expecting perfection, there really is there's very little risk taking, there's very little expansion outside the comfort zone. And so just that sense of, like, giving ourselves permission to suck at something new, giving
Mm.
ourselves permission to look back and reflect at maybe, like, our actions from the past year, or the from the past however, with, instead of harsh judgment, meeting it with some acceptance and a letting go that then allows us to move forward with a new story.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that to say that, to really connect with, like, even just as you're listening now, how do you feel? Are you tired? Are you settled? Are you restless? Are you wishing you could do more? It's really interesting. I mean, I think in these times where there's so much suffering, some of us really feel like, I want to do more, I want to do more, I want to do more, I want a big impact. And the great Black feminist poet Audre Lorde said, self-care is an act of resistance. So, we're all in it for the long haul, and that's the long haul of our lives, and the challenges we face. So self-care is not a selfish act. It is an act of resistance at the world wanting to wear us down, or just life wearing us down. So by, connecting to how you feel and honoring that, like I said in the beginning, we can't go past our limits, but we can rebuild, we can restore, we can rest, we can rejuvenate, and then we can go back out again. So if you're ready to go back out again, take it easy and be kind to yourself. If you're not ready to go back out again and extend your reach, that's okay. Just what can you do? And I think Brodie and I have talked about a number of things that can be done to help restore and rebuild and, renew. So, it all has a season, it all has a cycle, it all has a rhythm, and everyone's rhythm is different. And so just, it's important to tune into what your rhythm is, and just, find a way to honor that and care for yourself.
And I think we'll leave it there. Ellen Goldsmith, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for such a heartfelt and authentic conversation.
Oh, thank you, Brodie, for having me and going there together.
Thanks for listening today. To check out the show notes, get on my email list, or drop me a line, head to brodiewelch.com. That's Brodie with an IE and Welch with a CH. I'd love to hear from you. If you learned something new or feel inspired to try something different in your life, I'd love for you to pay it forward by sharing this episode with a friend who you think could also benefit, and give them a reason to listen. You'll be helping to create a world where we encourage each other to embody self-respect. Till next time, be good to yourself.